Hello, and welcome to episode 95 of Design Curious Podcast. I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. Today on the podcast, we are talking about lessons learned on the projects. You will inevitably make a mistake at some point while you're running your project because you're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And I am going to share with you today a lot of the mistakes that I made. Hopefully you won't repeat these. This is coming from a document that I have internally called Lessons Learned. I'm adding to it all the time with each project. I kind of reevaluate and see what it is that maybe I could have done better. And so then I add it to the list. So we're going to talk all about that today. If you are interested in learning more from me and learning from my mistakes and how to do it the right way the first time, you might want to get into my Design Mentor. There I can work with you one-on-one on this online platform. And there's other up-and-coming designers in there as well. You can resource and ask them questions along the way. So check that out. Links are in the show notes. And now let's talk about lessons learned. You're now listening to Design Curious, a place where you, creative one, are here to learn about what it really is like to be an interior designer. And I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. If you're worried about how to succeed in a creative career, if you're ready to learn your next steps to become an interior designer, and if you want the satisfaction of doing something you love every day, you are in the right place. Grab a coffee, a notebook, and let's dig into today's episode. So I'm going to read through a few of these notes that I took for each client that I had a lesson learned. I would say the majority of them are resulting from miscommunication or mismanaging the client's expectations. At least a good 60% of them are because of that. And a few are other things. So let's get into it. And I'm just going to read, I won't tell which client it's for, of course, but I will read what the problem was and how we addressed the lesson learned. One of the first ones is that the client had an unrealistic timeline and budget and insisted on working with us, even though we had turned them down on the initial phone call. They called us back and they said, we really can't get anyone else. We really need a designer to help us. Probably because I'm a recovering people pleaser. Finally said yes. And I definitely should have stuck with my gut on this one. But we kind of bent over backwards to help meet their unrealistic timeline and budget on this, and they were kind of running the project. They were calling the shots. And this is before I really had honed in a lot of my procedures and practices. And now I really run every client and every project exactly the same way. I have it all set up in Asana. The task goes from one to the next, and I'm really in control of the project. But before I had this clear, defined process, I would sometimes acquiesce to the client because I wanted to please them. So we did take on this project. We also had to scramble and find contractors we don't usually work with to come on board and do a quick job. And the result was that they were very upset with the quality of work. They were upset with how long things actually took because they were still having unrealistic expectations, and it opened a whole can of worms. So the lesson learned is to really stick with our gut when we want to say no to a client, and that they really cannot have everything they want in the timeline that they want if it's not realistic. And so really sticking to those rules and making sure the client understands that we can't wave a magic wand and get it all fixed just because they want to move in at a certain time. Another one is that a client felt that they were not getting their money's worth out of a paint consultation. This was an interesting one. I remember vividly. We went on this paint consultation, and now we very clearly define exactly what we'll be doing on our color consults. We bring out our fan deck of paint colors, and because I've been working with colors for so many years and I'm actually really good with color, I am very confident when I'm going to choose my colors that basically the little swatch that I see is going to look great on the house or in the house. So the client was not very communicative during the consultation, did not give a lot of feedback, asked for a couple different options. We did that. We sent them the list with all the sheet colors that they can hand off to their painter to get it painted out. And After a week or two, we received a handwritten letter in the mail from this individual who really, actually, I think it was typed out and hand signed, but she was really upset with what she had received with her paint consultation because she thought we were going to come out, take photos of the house, have our computers upload the photos, and then use a rendering program to, on the spot, show her the different colors of her house, how they render with the actual paint colors that we're selecting. This is not at all a service that we said that we would provide. This is what she was expecting. And she said that her nephew or someone that she knows is in college and taking a Photoshop class. Have we ever heard of that? Photoshop? Maybe we should use it in the future. So I laughed and I brushed this off, and I might have replied, sent a reply and thanked her for her kind words we had taken into consideration. But the lesson learned from this was to really clarify in our descriptions of our consultations what the client will be receiving. You can go to our website and see those specific details there. Sometimes people just don't pay attention to what you're telling them and they just want to hear or have assumptions. So it's good to go over these things several times with them to make sure they are understanding what it is that they will be receiving. Okay, another problem that we had on a job site was that we had a sofa show up that was upholstered in the wrong fabric. Now, the fabric was only slightly different. It's almost the same color. It just didn't have the same pattern that the original fabric was in. And the way that this happened is because we did not at that time have a process to order a cutting for approval or a CFA to be sent to the office before they upholstered that sofa. We ordered the fabric that we thought we were ordering. We sent it to the upholsterer. They put it on the sofa. They sent us the sofa, and it wasn't until then that we realized it was the wrong fabric. So obviously it was an expensive mistake on our part. The client, even though they said, the fabric isn't terrible, but it's not what we ordered. It's not what we agreed to. We actually want it to be changed to the correct fabric, which is understandable. So we did pay out of pocket to get that reupholstered correctly because that was our mistake. And now we always order CFAs and we always double check the fabric codes and everything in our process. We have a much better process lined up for making sure the right fabric gets on the right piece and that it's delivered correctly. There were a couple cases that we had noted that we had signed a contract with one of the spouses of a married couple, and they failed to inform their spouse of all of the details in the contract or the pricing. And so when they got their first invoice, their spouse was shocked beyond belief about how much the design fees were and why would they ever agree to this. And so we realized the lesson learned from this was to always ask who is the decision maker in the project, who is going to be responsible for paying the bills, and we need to have all those decision makers at the initial consultation, and they need to both read through and agree to the contract and the billing. Just making sure there's no surprises. We don't like there to be surprises because we try to manage everyone's expectations during that initial consult and going through the contract, explaining our fees, making sure they understand our value, and then it doesn't come as a shock. Another problem we had on a project was that I was working with a contractor who was anxious to get the project started, and he wanted to get the demo done before the permit was issued, which is, you can do that. You just can't close up any walls or anything until it does get inspected. But it ended up being quite delayed in the permit office. And even though the client wasn't living on site where the construction was happening, it was extremely frustrating for the client to see this house now in disarray and no progress being made for weeks because we were still waiting for that permit. So we learned that we don't schedule demo until we have the permit approved. There's a few in here where we are noting that the client either was a personality that we did not like to work with, or they treated our contractor or us disrespectfully. And so we have the lesson learned that we have permission to say no to clients that we think do not align with how we want to work with them. One of our core values is kindness. So we require that of our clients, and we also give it to the people that we work with. There have been a couple instances early on in my career where I used certain contractors who ended up not being as professional as I expected them to be. For example, one of them brought their dog onto the job site, which they will often do. Sometimes you see a dog in their truck or something like that. But the work that was being done was inside the house, and this contractor let the dog come inside the client's house while he was doing his work. And this client did not like dogs at all and was not okay with him not asking about bringing his dog into her home while he was working on the project. So that is a contractor I chose not to work with after that project. And there was another contractor who also, his level of work was great as like a handyman, but it was not up to par for the caliber of projects that I was working on and the expected service that he would need to require, like cleaning up the space and hiring contractors that were respectful of the client's time, and also not having music that was so loud. And so we did eventually come up with like a recommended behavior on site that we sometimes, would have our contractors agree to. Now, the contractors that I work with mostly though are really respectful and really have great processes themselves, and I don't even have to worry about that. One of the problems I had on a project was with, it was a commercial job, and I didn't realize when I was hired at the time that I was going to need approval of an entire board of individuals. And I thought it was just the person who had reached out and hired me to help them with their space. So when it came down to the presentation and making decisions, I hadn't been speaking with all the other board members. And then all of a sudden they had way different ideas of how the vision should be for that project. And while I don't do commercial anymore, definitely learned that if, this is another example of like who's going to be making the decisions. We need to clarify up front that if it is a board, that we need to collectively get their input at the beginning of the vision, or have one person be this spokesperson for the vision of that group, and that they will make the final decisions that I would be presenting to them and maybe not the group. Because that was extremely frustrating after I had worked with this individual and come up with a vision and a plan and had the presentation, that some people were like, this is not at all what I was thinking we were going to be doing. And so that was entirely frustrating. The project came to a halt and actually was never picked back up. Like I said before, a lot of it's really just misunderstandings. I have from early days, there was one where the client mistook our design fee estimate to be the estimate for the overall project cost. And so now we definitely clarify with clients that this is what the project costs. Like, for example, you're going to remodel your kitchen, you need $150,000. And when I say that's your budget for the kitchen, that does not include design fees. So if we're going to include design fees, we need a budget of $200,000 or, whatever it is for the project. And just really making sure that the design fees are always on top of whatever else is happening with construction and materials and furnishings. So we have language now in our contract that really clarifies all of that. There are a few instances I have noted where client was upset or disappointed by the actual cost of the project once it was presented. So it's really hard when you're establishing in the initial consultation a budget and also kind of giving ballpark estimates. They always hold you to it, even if they say they're not going to. So every time I try to overestimate, it still doesn't seem to be enough. Everything always is costing more nowadays, it seems, than I expect or even the client expects. And so we've been developing more language, whereas we are reminding the client that we really cannot tell them what the budget is until we've spec'd out the project. And we will do that based on what their needs are. So whether they like high-end, or they like mid-range or budget-friendly kind of pricing, that's the area we'll design in, and then we'll see how much it costs. Most of them are okay with that, and it really helps to give a better idea for the client. I mean, we'll do have general estimates, but we have to always say the disclaimers like this can change a lot. It can vary a lot depending on the project. But, the average kitchen remodel costs $150,000 to $250,000. But, if they go super high end on everything, or they pick a granite that's really rare, that can add $40,000 to the project. So we want to be able to design the project to the client's expectations, but it's not always going to be within budget. And so then it's our job to help the client figure out a way to get to a point of where they're comfortable spending and what they're going to receive for that, whether it's breaking it out into phases or reselecting some of the higher ticket items. But we want to make sure the client has a say in what it is that they're not going to spend their money on and what they do want to spend their money on. So basically, it comes down to just being a really good communicator, just more communication. We have developed a lot of PDFs and little reminders, some canned emails we send out throughout the project. Just be like, just a heads up, we're heading into the remodeling or the construction part of the project, and you're going to experience this kind of frustration, and this is normal. And, just try to remind them, try to manage their expectations, because people easily forget what you tell them unless it's a number, a budget. And people really just want to believe what they want to believe. So you have to keep communicating with your client about all these challenging and difficult topics, just so that they have a really good expectation of what it's going to be like from start to finish. That's kind of the gist of what I have in my lessons learned document. Like I said, it's a living document. I'm adding to it all the time. It's kind of fun to go back and see from years ago, before I had systems and procedures and a lot of things that I was doing differently, and obvious ways that I have pivoted to correct those mistakes. And we definitely experienced far less frustration from clients than we used to. It's really great to have a system and procedure that takes the client through the same process every time. I had one in here that said the client hadn't said that they were in a rush. And so because we had a lot going on at that time, we kind of put their project on the back burner, and we didn't have our established procedures yet, like in Asana, where we reviewed it every week and say, okay, where does the client need to be now? Where we're going to move them along. And we just I think we kind of forgot about it, the project, for like a week or 2 or 3, and really didn't make much progress. And the client had started getting frustrated because even though they said it wasn't a rush, they still wanted to see progress and get check-ins and things, which we do now. Every Friday we'll send an email to the client saying, here's where your project's at. Here's, what's coming next. We have these questions for you. Every client just loves having that touch point every week, and it's also another opportunity to really manage their expectations, and then it gives them room to express anything that they might be experiencing through the project. 3 or 4 times through the project, we check in with the client and say, hey, we're about, 50% through the project. Just wanted to see how you're feeling about everything. If there's anything we can improve, let us know. Just to give them an opportunity to tell us any frustrations before the end of the project when they're crying or whatever because they're so frustrated by the length of time or how much it costs. So we try to get in front of all those issues before they happen. Wouldn't you want to do that? So I do recommend having a lessons learned document. There's always going to be something that you're learning. Even if you learn from me and others a lot of mistakes to avoid, you're still going to be making a few mistakes because you can't know everything. And it's great to track those and learn from them and apply new processes and procedures. So like I said, I hope you learn from my mistakes and not repeat them, but there will be something that you know that you can do better the next time. And so it's great to track that and kind of, not take things so seriously. It is, like I heard recently someone say that design problems are first world problems, really. And so it's not the end of the world. You need to be able to sit back and be like, okay, yeah, I didn't do that perfectly. And, it was frustrating for the client. If I had been in their shoes, I probably would have been frustrated too. And so it's looking at that and seeing how you can mitigate that in the future. All right. So I hope you learned something new today. That's it for today. And next week, I'll have another great episode for you. And until then, stay creative. Thanks for listening. If you love this episode, please leave a rating and a review. This helps me reach other curious creatives like you. If you have a topic request or would like to contact me, simply head over to my website, rwarddesign.com, or email me at podcast@rwarddesign.com.